Wow, let's talk about your career. You've been in the play-by-play game a heck of a long time. How did it start? How did it start with the LA Galaxy?
Well, I'm a survivor, I guess. It started with me just being a pain in the rear to the Galaxy management at the time, the ownership group at the time. The league was very small, and I was a pretty aggressive guy at a younger age, and therefore I was able to make connections with that ownership group, and eventually they allowed me to host the talk show for them on my radio station. And then once they started broadcasting in English, gave me an opportunity to fail, and I didn't fail. So here I am.
Oh my goodness. What a way to jump on an opportunity. Okay, so you started when the MLS started, right?
I did. Well, I started in 1996. I was the public address announcer for the very first game for the LA Galaxy, and then eventually the talk show host for them,
Right.
Galaxy Talk, in 1997 and 1998, and then 1999. Finally, we had English radio and television, and I was given an opportunity.
So, what was your reaction when you got the gig that you were the play-by-play guy? What was that? Explain it. What happened that day?
I think for me, it was more relief because this is what I wanted to do. I was doing indoor soccer before Major League Soccer started, 1994, 95, and then MLS got underway, and this is why I got into the business, and this is what I wanted to do, and therefore it was either sink or swim. And in this particular case, I was able to swim and keep paddling, like a duck.
It's interesting. Usually play-by-play, the more, I guess, the more popular play-by-play jobs are for major sports, right?
Right,
Baseball,
right.
football, whatever. So was there ever an inkling for you to go that route, or was it always soccer?
Now, soccer got me into sports broadcasting, and to me, soccer was my little league baseball when I was growing up, and I took that all the way through high school. And even when I thought about sports casting, it was in the hope that there will be a league. And at that time, it was indoor, and so for me, it was in my hometown of San Diego was the San Diego Sockers, and I was allowed to broadcast games into a tape deck as to practice as far as what I was doing in my internship with them, and then got hired at a news talk station that hopefully would go all sports one day, and it did, and it became the second actually the first all sports station on the West Coast, and I think one of three at the time in the United States.
My goodness. So what was the flavor for soccer back then? Like when you're trying to get that Galaxy gig? I know the World Cup in
Right,
94, that's when there
right.
was some heat. But before that, was there anything happening?
Well, I think the flavor for soccer was the question: is soccer ever going to make it in this country? And people like myself would carry the water for the sport around and try to water the grass, so to speak, and say, yeah, it's going to grow, it's going to make it, it's going to survive. And honestly, I think we are still on the climb. We've seen good things both in the men and the women's side of things, but we're still on the climb because I come from a past of where we felt we did make it at some point with the NASL, and we thought we had a very good indoor league, and those things fail. And when economies go sideways and people with a lot of money decide this is not fun anymore, then sports tend to go away.
Yeah, it's true. It's true. When you don't have the funds, you're right.
Right,
Curious. So, like at the beginning of the MLS, like what were the
mm-hmm.
working conditions like? I'm sure you guys didn't have all the money in the world.
Right.
So, what was that like?
Well, I mean, in my case, we were at the Rose Bowl. So
Oh,
whatever working conditions there were at the Rose Bowl for anybody else were the same working conditions for us. In terms of when we did television, I think it was done about as good as you can do for the time.
mm,
Um, I don't think anybody was really lacking. I mean, instead of having 15 cameras, we probably had 6 or 7 cameras. But that's how it was at the time. And as
yeah,
progress, you know, came about, then we got better and better along the way.
right. Do you still remember your first call with the Galaxy?
The very first call, I do not.
Okay.
I do remember the early days. I do remember the first championship. Um, In fact, I don't remember the very first game I did for the Galaxy. Now that
Right.
you bring it up,
Right.
but I think you just look at you remember moments, and I think other people remember other moments that you might have forgotten. And so when you have a conversation, it's like, oh man, I don't remember that exact play,
Right.
but that's what you need to realize is that everything you say, everything you say on a broadcast can be a moment for somebody else. And that's why it's so important to try to get your job right.
No pressure, by the way. Like play by play is tough. It is really tough.
Yeah. Yeah, it is. It can be. It can be. But I've been fortunate. I grew up in the sport, and it's kind of like breathing for me. And in that regard, I'm only happy when I'm actually announcing a game, and I feel comfortable in rhythm when I'm announcing a game. And so right now that we're in the off season, I'm a bit cranky about that because there's no games going on, and I can't wait to get back underway.
Oh man, I believe it. You're a lifer. It's all good. You're passionate. I love it, Joe. So when you're doing your play by play, what's the preparation? What's a day in the life like for Joe?
Well, I think if it's a Saturday game, preparation begins on a Wednesday normally.
Okay.
And that's kind of looking at the opponent, going back and looking at the last game the Galaxy played, and just kind of see what the trends are to that point. Mid-season, you have a pretty good idea who's doing well, who's not doing so well. But early in the season, it's really discovery time. It's discovery with the new players in the Galaxy and what the flavor of the Galaxy is going to be for that particular season. And really, it's a discovery of that opponent that week. And you might have two or three games in, and really you don't have an understanding of who they are. And so it's a little more of a deep dive in what they did in the offseason, what this guy is supposed to do for this particular team, and so forth. And then you start from there. And then each day you usually get more information leading up to the game. And then on game day, I like to be there early and take the whole day in. And that's just my routine.
Mm-hmm.
And by game time, I'm sure I'm ready to go. I feel good about the game, and I'm ready to go.
Right. So, a lot of, it's interesting. Maybe a lot of people out there are listening or watching this interview. They don't understand the level of preparation. Like these guys don't just hop on the mic the day before. They have to know what's going on and stuff like that.
Sure.
So there's a lot of prep. I'm guessing you're on the online, looking at websites, making phone calls to
It's a daily
team.
thing. Well, here's the thing. I mean, everybody has a different routine, and my
Okay.
routine really is a daily thing. I'm checking in daily with everything that's going on,
Right.
whether it's Galaxy social media channels, whether it's the Galaxy website, MLS, the other big websites that cover soccer and what happens around the game in the United States. So that's kind of what I'm doing, and it's just a normal thing because I was brought up in a newsroom environment. That's already instilled in me. So that's as soon as I click the computer on, I'm going through everything. And that's just a normal thing for me. So I don't have a list of, oh my God, I need to check this off and
Okay.
check that off and check that off. Guys will do game boards, and I
Mm.
have my own version of a game board, which is more of a muscle memory thing that I use a pencil with a game sheet, so to
Mm.
speak, a field sheet, and I like to just kind of doodle on that, and that'll give me the important things that I want to bring up in the broadcast, and I think will come about naturally in the broadcast. Other guys will do a full on game board like an NFL game and
Yeah.
have pieces of paper with little notations of size and weight and where they're from and so forth. And I think the game is too fast for that, but
Right.
other guys are able to work it in. And so everybody has a little bit of a different flavor that they bring to the game.
Have you talked to other guys? Have you talked to the big guys like Joe Buck, these guys, like to get their take on how they do it?
No, not necessarily Joe Buck, but I grew up in sports radio and was the executive producer of a big station out here. And we had the Chargers on our station
Hmm.
and had a pretty famous play by play guy. And I had an opportunity to ingest what he was doing on a
Nice.
day to day basis. And the other guys, like Joe Buck, I'd rather interview them and talk about games than actually a how to because like I said, I've always felt everybody does it differently and you find your comfort level and then you go from there.
Got it. All right, Joe, let's talk about the art of the call. Okay,
Right.
say a major moment happens in a game. I'm guessing, it's just off the top of your head. There's no preset template
Mm-hmm.
for that moment. So is it something that it happens on the field. You just react. You trust your instincts and react, right?
Well, I think it's a little bit different. You do eventually you do that, but I
Yeah.
think in the sport of soccer, it's about the ball and about everything that's happening off the ball.
Hmm.
And if you're doing your job right, then you have a good idea where the ball might go and who's defending on the play, and
Hmm.
then you can, if you're speaking it properly and using small, short sentences as opposed to over talking, then you can paint the picture with broad strokes and eventually bring it down to the goal opportunity or save
Hmm.
and go from there. But it's not just the ball. It's not just the puck. It's not just the basketball. It's about who has the ball, who's off the ball, who's defending on the play, and then bringing that picture. So it's painting the picture.
And that's the difference between the radio call and like a TV call, whereas the
Yeah,
TV tells a story with the pictures. So obviously that's a level of difficulty that if you're a young play-by-play person, you have to understand that difference and adjust for like how do you learn how to paint a picture? You're just like how'd you do that?
I got a chance to grow up around the greatest broadcasters in the business in Southern California.
Right.
There's Vince Scully, of course, who's considered the greatest ever, and I wouldn't argue with that. But Bob Miller with the LA Kings,
Yep.
and also with Nick Nixon of the LA Kings, and Chick Hearn with the Lakers, and those guys right there. And Lee Hamilton, who was the Chargers play-by-play guy, and a guy that I worked with for 20 years, I think, in broadcasting. So you learn by listening to them. You learn by watching them from afar,
Hmm.
and you go from there. You take it all in, and for me is it's not about asking questions. It's about shutting up and watching. And for me, it's always been you learn more by watching than just by listening or taking notes. Because if you watch people, you see the action, and
Hmm.
that's where I've learned. And I think for young people that are getting into the business, they're getting into this business at a time where it's all video. Really, it is. And so their preparation and their presentation is going to be different than mine. I come from somewhat of an older um, mold, so to speak,
Hmm.
into the broadcast industry today, and my fundamentals might be a little bit different than a young person today with iPhones running around and cameras and so forth, and producers telling them not to describe the play as much as somebody else and bring this as opposed to that. And so, what I would do as a young broadcaster is not necessarily on television describe all the action that's happening, and even on radio you don't necessarily do that. You find your ebb and flow along the way, and where you can bring in certain anecdotes or not. And but on television, uh, you only ramp up in the moment. You really don't. It's really a reaction, 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 and then you ramp up in the moment, in and around the goal, so to speak.
Right. So, okay. So we're talking radio. Let's talk about the future of it. Okay. There's been a lot of disruption, right? You're
Right.
talking about video, how there's more of a focus on that. So, what is the future of radio play-by-play calls? Will there always be a place for it? Or because, yeah, it's just,
I don't
I
know.
still listen to the radio when I'm in the
Right.
car,
Right.
but I also listen to a lot of podcasts, man. So,
Right.
their future.
So I think as long as there are broadcasts available in the car, then radio will survive. I think when everybody's going to say we're going to be just on your iPhone and so forth, radio still survives in that fashion because you plug it into your car, right? So you plug it into your entertainment system, and as long as people are not on autopilot, then you're going to be able to listen, but not necessarily watch. And I think that's where radio survives. It's been predominantly an in-car entertainment system for I don't know 35 years, 40 years now. And I think what radio needs to do, if it thinks it's going to survive, it needs to be more relevant. going forward. It needs to compete in the app world a little bit better, and I think it is. But we're in a constant transition right now with new technologies and new apps and new things coming along the way,
Mhm.
where I think radio needs to get out in front of that and find a way to decide what it's going to be. And it might be on the local level where it survives the most, because
Right.
you don't have local news, you don't have local weather, you don't have local sports unless you're listening to the local station. And that might be on an app. It doesn't have to be on a transmitter. It'll be on an app.
Right. And you're open. Like I'm getting from you, Joe, that you're open to these changes, that you have no choice, man. You have to adapt or you die, right? Pretty much. Like,
Right.
so
Well, I
yeah.
mean, I think where I come from, you know, sports radio was in its infancy when I started. There was WFAN, there was WIP in Philadelphia, and there was us, Extra Sports 690, or when we started the Mighty 690. And so we were in the forefront of things. We were always doing new things. And I think that's been instilled in me to continue to forge forward. And I think what we need to do is continue to find our place, whatever that is. Now, let's be honest here. I think in talk shows that are on radio, they need to have video these days. I think because we have in-office listening, so you're going to have in-office viewing. Somewhere in the corner of your television, of your screen there in your office, you're going to have that. And I think you have to be a different type of entertainer, and that's no different than, let's say, vaudeville was. When that was Bob Hope and those guys were broadcasting on radio with an ensemble cast and all that stuff. You're going to have to do that now with video to be successful. And that might be a different definition of radio, but that's how the radio stations, the radio industry, I think is going to have to find its way to survive.
You know what? There is a soft spot for me with radio because I'll watch like a sports center and they play a game. And yeah, you could just let the regular TV call go of a big
Right.
moment, but something about sometimes they put in that radio call of
Right.
that big moment. It's just a different experience. Yes, it's just a different sound, but it's a bit, richer, a bit more emotion in there. I don't know. Man, like I would miss radio if it ever were to go. I don't think it will, but I don't
Well,
know.
I
It's just a
think
different experience for sure.
you're right. And I agree with you because I think the radio call is usually of that particular team, right? The
That's right.
winning team. And they might even have the losing call there too, because it might be dramatic as well.
Right.
But unfortunately, what happens on a national TV call is the broadcasters are forced to take a step back and be in the middle. And so they are just a half second behind that particular excitement. There are some guys that do bring that excitement on television
Yeah.
and have earned a great career in doing that.
Yeah.
But there's a lot of them that are just, a lot of broadcasters today, a lot of young broadcasters especially,
Hmm.
are told this is not how to present a game.
Hmm.
Whereas a lot of the older broadcasters, especially the ones that I mentioned, all came from radio and are all very descriptive in their calls. And the veterans today still are. The younger guys are not.
Right.
It's just kind of how it goes. And it's
So
just, it's an evolution. It happens. I'm
yeah,
just lucky to have been part of it. So,
for sure. So Joe, tell me, how does it feel when you have fans come up to you, right? And they're like, Joe, man, you had a great call in that game last night. That particular moment,
right.
it stays with me. People will like maybe go up to you years later and say, Joe, man, that call, I just loved it.
Right.
How does it make you feel when you have that kind of impact on people?
Number one is I've learned that it's a responsibility
Mm.
to be on the microphone for the masses that listen to the Galaxy or watch the Galaxy. And so they take it seriously all the time because they're taking it seriously also. So if you
Mm.
don't take it seriously, your job, why would I, as a listener or viewer or whatever, right? You're doing them a disservice and you're doing the club a disservice. That's number one. Number two, it's an honor. If somebody comes up to you and says, hey, I heard that from 1999
Yeah.
or the 2002 championship call with Carlos Ruiz, and I was there, that type of thing.
Yeah.
Um, it's just an honor. It's gratifying. It basically you get the feeling that, hey, you did something good for somebody along the way, and for the Galaxy, because we've been around now quite some time. We've had elders, grandparents, young kids grow up and become parents. And so to be part of that's an honor. I mean, that's an honor that, you know, that's like, that would be like, I think, a doctor delivering you, right? And then delivering your kids,
Yeah.
that type of thing.
Yeah. I can only imagine how like powerful that is for you, just to get that kind of validation. Like, not only did you impact him that way, but also a validation of your talent, a validation of, yeah, how you execute your job. Like, that's awesome. All right. So, Joe, throughout your years with the Galaxy, you've seen some stars roll up,
Right,
in a Galaxy uniform. You've seen Beckham, you've seen Ibrahimovic, all these guys.
right.
Talk about Beckham. What was Beckham mania like? David Beckham.
Not enough credit goes to what David Beckham has brought to this league. And many times I've said, before David Beckham, not many people knew who the Galaxy were when we traveled on the road. And back then, we would travel. Normally, we'd wear the polo shirts and so forth. And that was the customary thing to do. And you get to a hotel counter and they would ask you, "Oh, it's the Galaxy. What's going on?" Or, "No, the Galaxy are playing tomorrow night," and so forth. "Is it a tournament?" "No, they're playing against your hometown." "Oh, okay." Well, when David Beckham came and the logo changed, instantaneously everybody knew who the Galaxy were. And so we changed the way we traveled. We traveled in regular clothes as opposed to our polo shirts, because in the hotels as well as the airports, we had to protect David's identity so he
Mhm.
could at least, sit and wait for the plane and not get, attacked. And so that's number one. But also the players that started to come into the league, from you had David Beckham coming in there when he still had meat on the bone. He was still a good player. He was still playing for his national team. And then Thierry Henry came in at New York. And
Yeah.
then the Galaxy were able to bring in, Robbie Keane. And then they ended up winning in back-to-back championships and three championships in 4 years there, I believe it was, if my memory serves me correct. And they got to the 2009 final as well and went to penalty kicks and unfortunately lost that one. But David changed everything for the LA Galaxy, and he changed everything for Major League Soccer. And he's done it again in Miami with bringing in Leo Messi.
Yeah. So, what was he like? Did you get much time with David?
Um, well, just enough time that you just kind of you're around him
Mhm.
and you're respectful. And had a chance to interview him at the end of his career. And I would tell you this, that just by watching him, as I said earlier, you pay attention. Just by watching him, David tried tremendously to be a normal person, and I always felt that way. He tried he understood how big a personality he was, but his actions were to be a normal person. So if somebody wanted his time, somebody came running to get an autograph or a picture, David would do his best to do that, to get that done.
Okay, so he's a classy guy. Okay, cool.
Absolutely. Good
Awesome.
man. And if you've watched this documentary, I think it's accurate, very accurate.
Okay, cool. So, Joe, take us behind the curtain here. I want to hear some fun stories, some funny stories on the job with Joe. Like, what's happened? Like, anything you can remember? Maybe a messed up call. I
Oh,
don't know. Someone spilled tea on the air. Like, I don't know what happened.
well, there's always goofy things that happen, and I think most of my fun happened with Kobe Jones in the broadcast booth on the TV side of things.
Oh,
Just because I called probably 95% of Kobe's games with the LA Galaxy, if not all of them. And so Kobe was as a player, you're different. And this is not just Kobe, this is soccer, NFL, baseball, you name it. Players are different when they're players. But when they're retired, it's a whole different story. You meet the person. And so that was a blessing for me. I had a good time with him and in there, and Kobe would you know kid on me, bust on me a little bit, and make things light in the broadcast booth. And things always happen. I mean, we've had when Zlatan Ibrahimovic scored his 500th goal, we were in Toronto, and half the production team, again going into the future and progress, half of our production team would be back in LA, and the broadcasters were on the road at the time. And for the final 20 minutes of the game, we had no contact with the studio. And I didn't realize this until I was wondering why my producer wasn't telling me to read a liner. I text him back, "Are you trying to talk to me?" And he goes, "Yes." And then we realized, well, we've lost contact even though we're still on the air. And so we had to play this game of he would text our stagehand then would hand me whatever he wanted me to read. And those are the type of things that go on in a broadcast booth. And we were in Montreal, and all of a sudden the producer says, "Hey, I don't know if we're going to get on the air because we're having some transmission issues." And
Oh,
and then we're just running around. We're panicking. Okay, what do we have? It's like Apollo 13. What do we have? Get the duct tape and whatever we can do. And then 5 minutes before airtime, hey, it works. Okay, go. And you do things live. We're going to do it live. And we did do it live. And so, I think those are the type of things that I take. I mean, the early days, Mile High Stadium, the original Mile High Stadium, the erector set in Denver there. And not much worked. Not much worked at Mile High Stadium. And so, broadcast lines and so forth were not working in our broadcast booth. And, PR guy before he comes to the stadium runs out to Radio Shack when it was open back then and buys 100-foot cord, a phone cord, and we're running cord through the stadium to get the broadcast on the air. So those are the type of things that happen in terms of jokes and so forth. I think the players, they stay among themselves. The broadcasters, the hotel, stay among themselves,
okay.
and you build your camaraderie there. I think broadcasters who intertwine themselves with the players find themselves outside the business in a hurry. And I would say that to any young broadcaster, if you think you're going to run around with the players, that's a mistake.
Got it. You know what, Joe? Like I used to work in sports television up here in Canada. I was a TV
Okay.
reporter, did some anchoring as well. So I know exactly how you might have felt when 5 minutes to air, nothing is working, and you don't know if that red light's going to turn on that camera. So I get it, man. You must have been so freaking stressed.
Yeah, I mean, you just kind of look at it, and you know what? You kind of laugh. You have that nervous laugh, and you say, "Okay, well, we're here. We're in our suits. What do we have?" They said, "Well, we don't have the camera, but we have audio." I said, "Okay, well, if we
Yeah.
have to do it that way."
Yeah.
And ultimately, what we didn't have was a way to transmission the stand up for the pregame
Right.
at the end of the day, because you can do a back haul for, and I'm getting into the weeds here, a
Yeah.
back haul of the video and so forth to get your broadcast going.
Right.
And we did, we got it done. But it, those are the type of things you go through. And I don't think it's just an MLS thing.
Mhm.
I think every broadcast, goes without a net to a certain degree, and things fall apart, and you have to be good enough to deal with it. And luckily, I had really good people when I was young instill
Right.
some fundamentals in me
Right.
that I think when a lot of crap has hit the fan, that we've
Mhm.
been able to get through it, and we've never lost a broadcast,
Oh, wow.
and we never have lost a broadcast, and I'm proud of that.
Wow. We're talking over 20 years. Never lost a broadcast.
28 years.
Oh my gosh. Amazing. So,
Yeah.
okay. Do you write like, okay, the radio broadcast, do you write your own stuff like intros, extras when you're interview, like your own questions when you're
Mm-hmm.
interviewing players? Is that all you?
Yes. So what I'll try to do on a radio broadcast is I'd like to have the open go seamlessly. So I'll write my open, and then from there on, whether it's, let's say, for example, it's the interview with the coach or the manager, that's a conversation. That's just basically a conversation, because I don't like to have a press conference interview. I'm going to do 34 of those, hopefully some playoffs, maybe some other tournaments along the way. So you have to have that relationship with the manager. And so from that respect, I've had a good relationship with all the managers of the Galaxy. And, you have a conversation, you do your 5 to 6 minutes with that, and that's another segment. And then from there, you come on the backside, you're live. Other games have happened or are happening. And you get everybody, here's the scene set. Here's what this team has done. Here's what that team has done. Here's where the Galaxy are to start this game, what position they are in the Western Conference, and what this game means. Go.
Got it. So, to the viewer and listener who wants to be a play-by-play person, like we covered this during the conversation,
Sure.
actually, quite organically. Good storyteller, good communicator, writer. What other things, Joe, that person needs to have in their tool belt before becoming a play-by-play person?
understand that the glamour is all part of the delivery of the game, and everything else is work. And if you're not able to or not willing to put the work in, your time as a broadcaster, whether it's sports, news, whatever, entertainment, it's not going to last very long because there's always somebody else that's going to work harder than you. And the other thing I would say to young people that are getting into not only broadcasting, but whatever career that requires you to have some type of entertainment skill, even an athlete, uh, the most important thing for me among my staff was the guys that I could rely on. So be available because the call will come. And if you're not available for the call, then you'll be lucky to get another one.
So true. You got to be ready. So,
Yeah,
Joe,
absolutely. I mean,
yeah,
it's kind of like when love strikes. You better be ready to handle it.
that's right. Exactly. All right, sir. One final thing. So you've been very fortunate. Like you
Yeah,
earned this position with the Galaxy and whatnot. Just curious about today's broadcaster. Where do they find jobs? Where do they find these play-by-play gigs? I've seen that guys stay in their gigs for like decades.
yeah.
So how does somebody today, a young person trying to get into the biz, where do they find the work?
I think it's becoming more and more difficult in terms of the way, I guess, for me organically. Here in California, it's very difficult to have internships these days. The internships are now paid internships, and that puts a lot of pressure on the smaller organizations to bring people in. So in my case, there was an indoor soccer team that allowed me, as part of my internship, to broadcast games into a tape deck back then. And so that's not available to young broadcasters today. So what I always tell them is that if they're in college or community college, especially, if you have a sports team or a station on campus, you're the sports guy, you're the sports woman, you go do it. Well, I don't know how. Well, that's what this is why, here's where you're going to learn. You're going to fail. You're going to make mistakes. You better cut your teeth here because when somebody pays you, you won't have the opportunity to do that. So I tell them as early as you can, and some high schools have that. My old high school now has the ability to do that. Um, some high schools have that, and some colleges have certainly have it. Get involved as soon as possible because this is an industry of repetition. You don't become excellent by reading a paper, or reading a book. That's not going to be the case. You have to learn to be on camera. You have to learn not to listen to yourself. You have to learn not to worry about how you look when that red light goes on. You have to execute, and that's the most important thing. And it takes time to be able to get through all of those layers, to be able to be comfortable because some people still come to me and remember the very first day I was on the air at what was the mighty 690 at the time, and I wasn't supposed to be on the air. I was 19 years old, and I was at that time just a producer. But the afternoon guy says, "Here, go do the sportscast," and I'm looking at him like, "Okay," and I go on the air. And you're from Canada, so you can understand how Patrick Waugh's name would be pronounced by an American kid who hasn't done much hockey. Patrick Roy comes out, and so and so and so next thing I know, the hotline rings, and it's my boss. And to his credit, calmly he goes, "What are you doing on the air?" And I said, "Well, Lee told me just to go do this." He goes, "No, we're not going to do that yet." And I learned a moment that was a great moment there from my boss, and his grace allowed me to understand that when I became a manager, to also have that type of grace with the young guys that come along, because they're all going to fail. Every one of them are going to fail, and your job as a manager is to hug them and to put them back together so they can take another step forward. So that's what I would say is don't be afraid to fail. You're going to fail a lot, and don't listen to the critiques because the only critique you should be listening to are your mentors.
Right. Good advice. Good advice,
Thank you.
Joe. Sir, this has been awesome. Where can people find out more about you? How can they connect with you out there? Do you have a website? What's going on?
No, I kind of take it as it comes. I'm on the normal socials. I'm on Instagram and I'm on LinkedIn, as you found me on LinkedIn, and still on Facebook and Twitter, or X, or Twitter X as some call it. But that's really about it. I think that's about as entertaining as I'm going to be at this point, without embarrassing myself any more than I have
Right.
already.
You're too modest, Joe. You're too modest, man. You're too modest. Sir, thank you so much for doing this. I appreciate it.
Thank you for having me.
All right. A big thanks to Joe for being on the show. Much appreciated. I can't believe this guy has been a play-by-play guy for that long. Like, what a run. Tip of the cap, sir. Thanks again for being on the program. All right. That's it for this episode. Hopefully you got some value from it. Feel free to subscribe to the YouTube channel and podcast. Until next time, take care and have a good one.